On my first day at the office, my mom told everyone I was just the janitor pretending to be staff. "She's lying to herself," she said. But an hour later, I pulled out the ownership contract. Guess who owns 40%? I 36 male recently joined the company my grandfather co-founded decades ago. My mother 62 female worked there for over 30 years and was essentially running the place. I had been living abroad for years, built and sold a business, and quietly acquired 40% ownership of the company through a trust left by my grandfather. On my first day, I walked in hoping to work side by side with her, even if our relationship had always been distant. Instead, she laughed in front of the staff, said I was just the janitor pretending to be staff, and told them not to engage with my delusions. She humiliated me publicly. An hour later, in the leadership meeting, I revealed my ownership documents. She turned pale. Since then, things have spiraled. She's hostile, undermining me at every step, and now the board is starting to question her leadership. I didn't come here for a power struggle, but I also can't keep being disrespected. I had just moved back to Seattle after nearly a decade in Europe. I'd built something from scratch over there, a media analytics firm that managed to survive a shaky market and sold at just the right time. I wasn't a billionaire, but I walked away with enough to not need to work again, if I didn't want to. But I did want to. More than that, I wanted to reconnect with something personal. I wanted to build where I came from, to prove I wasn't just some aimless expat flitting from one tech trend to another. That's when I made the call to my grandfather's old lawyer. The shares my grandfather had left in trust for me, 40% of Eastfield and Ray, the company he co-founded, had just become available. I initiated the transfer. Silent, efficient. Only the board and the legal team knew at the time. I wanted to surprise my mom, maybe show her I had finally made something of myself in her eyes. That was my mistake. I had underestimated the years between us, the resentment I thought had cooled, the emotional chasm I assumed could be crossed with a simple gesture of legacy. The first day at the office was soaked in Pacific Northwest drizzle, the kind that just sticks to your skin no matter how good your coat is. I walked into the Eastfield and Ray building just off Denny Way, the same one I remembered visiting as a kid when my mother had to bring me to work because the nanny called out. Back then, I used to sit quietly in the corner of her office and read, knowing better than to interrupt. She didn't believe in coddling, or handouts, or even casual kindness. Everything with her was earned. Prove yourself or get out of the way. I walked in dressed in a sharp, dark gray suit, nothing too flashy. I nodded at the receptionist, who didn't recognize me but smiled anyway. The elevator dinged open onto the 10th floor, executive level. That's when I heard her. "She's lying to herself," Isolde said, her voice that same polished, clipped tone she used in every media appearance she'd ever given. "He told me he was starting over. But here he is. Wandering in with a briefcase like he owns the place. Probably thinks he's some kind of prodigal executive. Just smile at him, people. He's just the janitor in a suit." The executives around her chuckled, a few awkward, a few genuine. Some looked away when they saw me. She didn't. Her eyes locked on mine, and she offered a smile that wasn't really a smile. The kind of expression that dares you to respond. The kind that says, "You can't touch me." I said nothing. I kept walking. My pulse was roaring in my ears, but I forced a small nod and slipped into the corner conference room. An hour later, the quarterly meeting began. 15 people around a U-shaped oak table. PowerPoint slides, fiscal reports, projections. I waited. Let them all do their thing. Then, just before they adjourned, I stood. "I think we should address something," I said calmly. "There's been some confusion about why I'm here." Murmurs. Heads turned. Isolde shifted slightly in her seat. I opened my briefcase, pulled out a thick, signed folder, and placed it in the center of the table. "As of 3 weeks ago, I own 40% of Eastfield and Ray," I said. "That makes me the second largest shareholder." No one moved. "I'm not here to play pretend," I added. "I'm here to build something real." I didn't even look at her when I said it. She didn't speak. Not then. But in the hours and days that followed, the fallout came swift and cold. Emails forgotten to be CC'd. Meeting invites mysteriously disappearing. Staff avoided me in the hallways. When I asked the IT team for access credentials, they said they hadn't received authorization. When I asked Isolde, she said, flatly, "You'll need to prove yourself first." There was nothing subtle about it. She was waging a quiet war. And I was expected to lose. But I didn't. I started showing up earlier than anyone else. I began digging into project reports, combing through inefficiencies, proposing improvements. I met with junior staff, middle managers, anyone who had felt overlooked. I didn't try to replace her. I just tried to lead from where I was. And slowly, people started to shift. Not all of them. But enough. I found out later that Isolde had tried to block the share transfer when she first heard whispers of it. She had called the board in private meetings, sent emails full of veiled warnings. But the documents were airtight. My grandfather's signature still meant something. At the 6-month mark, I proposed a board restructuring, not to remove her, but to distribute some of the unilateral authority she'd held for too long. It passed. She didn't speak to me for 2 weeks after that. Not a word. Just cold silence when we passed in the hall. A quick turn of the head in the elevator. When she did finally say something, it wasn't what I expected. "You want my job," she said one night, leaning against the doorway of my office, arms crossed, wine glass in hand. "No," I said. "I want a company where people aren't afraid to speak." She scoffed. "You think you're better than me?" I looked at her, really looked at her. The high cheekbones, the posture still as rigid as ever. But behind her eyes was something brittle. Like a veneer too long exposed to weather. "No," I said. "But I think I'm trying to be different." She said nothing. Just turned and walked away. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the end for her. The weeks that followed that conversation felt like walking through a controlled burn. Tensions rose quietly, efficiently, and without pause. Isolde didn't lash out openly. That wasn't her style. She was measured, methodical. Her retaliation came in the form of whispered memos, hastily changed policies, and impromptu meetings I somehow always found out about too late to attend. It would have been almost impressive if it hadn't been so deeply personal. One afternoon, I returned from lunch to find my office had been moved. My nameplate is gone. My belongings, personal photos, files, my grandfather's old brass pen holder, packed into a box and left by the reception desk. "Facilities was told you were transitioning departments," the receptionist said, confused, almost apologetic. "By who?" I asked. She looked down. "Executive office." No one said it, but everyone knew what was happening. This wasn't a professional disagreement. This was a turf war. And the Queen was digging in her heels. I carried my things upstairs to a smaller office, a glorified storage closet, really, and set them back up. I didn't protest. I didn't send a scathing email. I just showed up early the next morning, as always, and kept doing the work. One by one, a few department heads started visiting my office, quietly, in the off hours. They came with concerns. Stories. Patterns. Accounts not reconciled properly. HR complaints buried under pending review. Promising junior staff passed over for promotions while loyalists got fast-tracked. I listened. I documented. I thanked them. I asked for patience. By the end of the quarter, I had compiled a quiet mountain of data, interviews, and discrepancies. All of it pointed to one thing: a company too long ruled by fear and favoritism. A culture held together not by leadership, but by intimidation. I didn't go to the board yet. I wasn't interested in torpedoing her reputation without giving her a chance to fix it. So I invited her to dinner. We met at a quiet Italian place near Pioneer Square, One we'd gone to once or twice when I was a teenager, back when she still made half-hearted attempts to pretend we had a relationship. She arrived late. Perfectly dressed, of course. Eyes wary, lips pursed. "This is about the board, isn't it?" she said before even sitting down. "No," I said, gesturing for her to sit. "This is about you and me." She raised a brow. "Spare me the therapy session, Callum." I looked at her across the table, trying to find a sliver of the woman I had once believed could change. But all I saw was armor. "I'm not here to replace you," I said. "I'm not here to punish you. But you're tearing down a company our family built because you refuse to believe I could be more than a failure." She laughed, a dry, humorless thing. "You think I care what you do here?" she asked. "I built this place from the ground up. Your grandfather gave you shares because he pitied you." I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse. "I have documentation," I said instead. "Testimonies. Financials. Complaints. All of it. If I go to the board, they'll have no choice but to act." For a moment, she said nothing. The waiter came by, dropped off water, sensing the tension and wisely avoiding small talk. "You'd really do that?" she asked finally. "I'd really rather not," I said. "But I'm not going to watch you destroy this place from the inside out just to prove a point." Her hand tightened slightly on the napkin in her lap. "You think you're doing the right thing," she said, so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "But you're just like him." It took me a second to realize she meant my father. "You know what he did?" she asked, her voice low. "Walked out. One day, just gone. Left me to raise a kid and run a company. No warning. No goodbye. Just left." Her eyes didn't meet mine. She stared at the candle in the center of the table like it held the past. "I didn't walk out," I said gently. "No," she snapped, eyes sharp again. "You ran. As soon as you were old enough. Europe. Startups. Always chasing something so you wouldn't have to look me in the eye." Maybe she was right. Maybe I had run. Maybe I'd tried to find myself anywhere but in her shadow. But I wasn't running anymore. "That ends now," I said. "We can fix this. Together. Or not." She didn't answer. She stood up, tossed her napkin on the table, and walked out without another word. After that dinner, things got quiet. Too quiet. For a while, I wondered if she was finally considering a truce. But no. She was just preparing her next move. I found out through a third party that she'd requested a formal internal audit of my projects. The ones I'd initiated since arriving. She wanted to prove I was mismanaging funds, cutting corners. Anything that could give her leverage. But I had kept everything clean. I'd made sure of it. The audit passed without issue. If anything, it validated my leadership. Then came the anonymous employee complaints, all centered on my unprofessionalism, my lack of experience, my emotional instability. HR flagged them, but they were so transparently manufactured that the review committee dismissed them quickly. But that was the thing about fighting with Isolde. She didn't care about winning cleanly. She cared about exhausting you. Bleeding your patience dry. By the 1-year mark, I had enough to bring to the board. Not just the data. But a movement. Managers and employees, some quietly, some publicly, began to speak up. To question decisions. To advocate for change. And still, part of me hoped she'd step aside before it came to a vote. She didn't. At the next board meeting, I sat across from her in the glass-walled conference room on the 10th floor, the same room where she'd once called me the janitor. Her hands were folded. Her spine is straight. She knew what was coming. But I didn't gloat. I didn't make it personal. I presented the facts, the data, the projections. The board listened. They asked questions. And finally, one of the senior members asked her directly, Isolde, would you consider a retirement plan? We believe the company is ready for a new chapter. She didn't speak for a long time. Just stared out the window. Then, finally, she said, I built this. We know, the chairman said. And we're grateful. But it's time. She stood up, smoothed her jacket, and said, you'll regret this. And she left the room. After that meeting, everything felt suspended. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, but stifles. Isolde didn't return to the office the next day. Or the day after. For someone who had made work her whole identity, it was unnerving. We half expected her to storm back in with legal threats or press statements. But there was nothing. Just an absence that stretched across the building like fog. HR received her official retirement paperwork by the end of the week. It was crisp, impersonal, typed in 12-point Times New Roman like it was any other memo she'd sent 1,000 times. No farewell message. No thank you. Just a date and a signature. Her office door remained locked for days. No one touched her things. Even the cleaning crew seemed to avoid it. There was a quiet anxiety around the company then. Some of it was anticipation. Some of it was guilt. Isolde had, for better or worse, defined the company for years. People had grown used to her efficiency, her control, her almost military-like precision. Even if they feared her, they respected her. Losing that presence left an odd vacuum. But the work went on. We moved quickly to restructure. Departments that had long worked in silos started communicating again. Staff meetings felt less tense. People spoke more freely, offered suggestions without glancing nervously toward the door. There was laughter in the hallways again. Even something as small as an open-door policy in upper management felt revolutionary. I'd like to say I felt triumphant. That I was riding some kind of high. But mostly, I felt numb. I'd spent the better part of a year in survival mode. Constant vigilance. Always waiting for the next passive-aggressive email, the next trap hidden behind professional protocol. Now that it was over, I didn't quite know how to be at peace. More than that, I missed something. Not her, exactly. But the hope I'd had. The hope that maybe we could have built something together. That legacy didn't have to mean war. About 2 weeks after she left, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a manila envelope containing a single item, a photo. It was me, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sitting in the corner of her old office, cross-legged with a book in my lap. Behind me, at her desk, she was caught mid-laugh, genuine, unposed. Her hair was darker then. Her expression is softer. There was no note. Nothing to explain who took the photo or why it had been sent. Just that moment, frozen. I kept it. Framed it, even. Not because it represented some rosy past, but because it reminded me there had been a time, however brief, when we weren't enemies. When she was still someone I wanted to impress. Weeks turned to months. My role in the company grew clearer. Staff morale improved. Performance indicators went up. But personally? I still had questions I didn't know how to answer. Why had she resented me so deeply? Why go to such lengths to belittle me, not just in private, but publicly? Some people said it was jealousy. Others claimed it was fear, of irrelevance, of being replaced. But to me, it felt deeper than that. One of the old VPs, Marla, came to see me not long after the dust settled. She'd worked with Isolde for over 2 decades and had always remained neutral during the power shift. We sat in my office late one evening with the lights dimmed and a pot of oversteeped tea between us. She was proud of you, you know, Marla said, sipping slowly. I blinked. What? She wouldn't say it. God forbid she expresses it. But she watched everything you did. Had your Berlin company bookmarked on her browser. Know your quarterly earnings. She didn't miss a thing. Then why? I started. Marla sighed. Because pride and envy live in the same house. She loved you in her way. But you were a mirror she didn't like looking into. You succeeded where she never dared to try. She built her world inside four walls. You built yours outside them. That scared her. I sat with that for a long time. It didn't fix anything. But it explained some things. Still, the wound remained. I started therapy. Quietly, without fanfare. Told no one at work. I just needed a space where I wasn't leading anything, where I could stop pretending that carrying a company and a lifetime of emotional baggage was fine. And in those sessions, I started unpacking the long shadow she had cast. The years of second-guessing myself. The need to prove my worth. The ache of wanting a parent's approval and never getting it, not really. My therapist said something that stuck: sometimes we grieve relationships while the people are still alive. Yeah. That. Life went on. A few months later, I ran into her. Not at a family gathering, not through some formal channel. Just coincidence. I was leaving a lunch meeting downtown. She was standing outside a bookstore on the corner of 4th and Spring, flipping through the pages of a hardcover. No makeup. Dressed casually, in jeans and a cardigan. She looked ordinary. For the first time in my life, she looked small. We made eye contact. She looked surprised. Tired. Unsure. "Hi," I said, just above a whisper. "Callum," she replied, not quite warmly, not quite coldly. We stood there for a moment, two people tangled in history but untethered in the present. She glanced down at the book, then back at me. "Still making waves?" she asked, faintly amused. I shrugged. "Just trying to steady the ship." She nodded. Looked past me, at nothing in particular. Then, softly, "It's in good hands." That was all. She tucked the book under her arm and walked away, disappearing into the crowd like any other pedestrian in the city. She didn't look back. And neither did I, not right then. But something shifted in me. The days after that encounter stayed with me like the echo of a bell. I didn't rush to tell anyone I'd seen her. There was nothing to report, no shouting match, no hug, no cinematic reconciliation. Just a few words exchanged on a rainy sidewalk, and then back to our separate lives. But it haunted me in the quiet hours. Her saying, "It's in good hands," didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like she was finally seeing something she couldn't before, or didn't want to. Still, I didn't get my hopes up. Work at Eastfield and Ray kept me occupied. The company was finally stabilizing in a way it hadn't for years. I noticed it in small things: new hires actually staying past their 90 days, long-term employees speaking more openly during meetings, cross-team collaboration that had once been unthinkable now happening weekly. And we were growing. The innovation team I'd built from scratch was now delivering results. We launched a campaign analytics platform that earned us a few write-ups in niche industry journals. Not flashy stuff. Just honest, steady progress. We weren't revolutionizing the industry, but we were fixing what was broken, from the inside out. Still, despite the board's support and the staff's growing trust, I felt a strange emptiness settling in. Like I'd finally won the war, only to realize I wasn't entirely sure who I was without the fight. That's when the letters started. I found the first one tucked into my mailbox at the office. No envelope. Just a folded page in my mother's handwriting, unmistakably neat, painfully precise. The same script she used on every note she ever left on the fridge when I was a kid. "You were right to call me out. That doesn't mean I'm ready to thank you for it. But I see what I couldn't do then. Doesn't change how it felt, but I see it now." There was no signature. No date. Just that. 2 weeks later, another appeared. I thought being feared meant I was respected. But I think I lost something along the way. Maybe a lot of things. I don't know if that's fixable. Just know that I do remember the little boy reading quietly in my office. And I didn't hate that version of us. They were always left anonymously, no return address, no clue how they were delivered. But I knew it was her. The tone, the timing, the sharp edges softened just enough to pass as vulnerability. Part of me wanted to respond. Part of me was afraid to. Therapy helped me sort through the mixed signals. My therapist said it was okay to appreciate a gesture without letting it rewrite the past. That forgiveness didn't require a door to be reopened, sometimes it was just a choice to stop bleeding from an old wound. I wasn't ready to forgive her. Not fully. But I wasn't angry anymore either. And that felt like progress. The third letter came months later, on my birthday. Handwritten on company stationery, the old kind with the gold Eastfield and Ray embossing at the top. Happy birthday. I hope you're still building, not just proving. That was always your strongest trait, you could create something from nothing. I was always too afraid of nothing to try. That one stayed in my desk drawer. I still haven't replied. I don't know if I ever will. But I stopped waiting for her to fix it. Instead, I started repairing the parts of myself I'd kept hidden, the parts that believed I had to earn love through success, that worth was transactional, that failure meant I became invisible. Those beliefs were hers. But I didn't have to carry them anymore. Around this time, something strange happened. People started coming to me not just for leadership decisions, but for advice. Personal advice. Work-life balance. Navigating difficult relationships. One guy asked me how to talk to his daughter who was applying to college, unsure if she wanted to follow in his footsteps. I gave the best answer I could. But afterward, I sat at my desk and stared out the window for a long time, wondering how I'd become someone people saw as stable. Me, the kid who once flunked out of a state university and ran to Berlin just to feel alive again. And yet, here I was. Somewhere along the way, without noticing, I had grown into someone my younger self might actually respect. Maybe even admire it. And that mattered more than any victory over Isolde ever could. The year following my mother's departure from Eastfield and Ray was the most transformative of my life. Not because of titles or power, those are surface level. But because I started to fully understand the long game. She had always played the short game. Control. Image. Efficiency. She thrived in systems where power was centralized, where fear held the machinery in place. But fear always breaks. It corrodes the foundation, slowly, until one crack collapses. I wasn't interested in building that kind of empire. I wanted something sustainable. Transparent. Humans. And I got it. The board formally appointed me Chief Strategy Officer, but in truth, I'd already become the company's nucleus. We shifted our internal culture to focus on mentorship and development. I launched a rotational leadership program for junior staff, something she'd always blocked because it diluted productivity. It became one of our proudest assets. In year 2, we were featured in Fast Company as one of the top mid-size companies for employee growth. Morale hit record highs. Attrition rates dropped by almost half. And best of all? My grandfather's legacy, the real one, not just the shares, was finally being honored. I framed his old compass and hung it in the lobby with a plaque that read, "Lead forward. But never forget who walked before you." People noticed. One afternoon, I received a message from a name I hadn't seen in decades, Gerald Albrecht, one of my grandfather's original business partners, the Ray half of Eastfield and Ray. He was in his 80s now, living in a quiet suburb outside Spokane, but still sharp. He'd been keeping an eye on the company through the press. "I always liked you," he said over coffee in my office one foggy morning. "Your mother. She had fire, no question. But fire only gets you so far. You? You're a builder. Like your grandfather." He paused and looked around the office. This feels right. Coming from him, it meant more than any quarterly report ever could. Later that month, I received an invitation to speak at a regional business leadership summit. I wasn't big on public speaking, but I agreed. The keynote topic? Leading through generational transition. I knew what story I'd tell. It wasn't revenge I was after anymore. It was recognition, not from my mother, but from the world she always tried to dominate with silence. On the night of the keynote, the venue was packed. Dim lighting. Dozens of faces looking up at me. I stepped onto the stage with a single photo in my jacket pocket, the one of me as a boy, reading quietly in her office, while she worked behind me, unaware of how much I was learning simply by watching. I didn't talk about the fight for shares, or the power struggles. I didn't name names. I just told the story of legacy, how it can either burden or inspire. How every generation decides what to carry forward and what to leave behind. And when I finished, the applause was warm. Earnest. Not because I was eloquent, but because I was honest. Afterward, while chatting with attendees, a woman approached me. Mid-40s. Sharp suit. Kind eyes. I used to work for your mother, she said. She was tough. Scary, even. But you? You're the kind of leader who makes people want to work harder. For something real. I thanked her, genuinely. And for a moment, I wished my mother could have heard it. But that's when the real full-circle moment arrived. A week later, the local business journal published a cover story about the company. They titled it, "From Fear to Foundation, How a Son Rebuilt His Legacy from the Inside Out." On the front page was a side-by-side image. One of my mother's, in her heyday, strong and commanding behind a podium, and one of me, standing in the atrium of our newly renovated office, staff laughing in the background. I didn't write the headline. I didn't even know it was coming. But when it dropped, the ripple was immediate. People called. Old colleagues. Distant relatives. Even a few of her former allies. Some congratulated me. Others offered guarded praise. But one message stood out, from Isolde Devereaux. Subject, saw the article clever title. Took me a minute. You win. I stared at the screen for a while. That was it. No apology. No warmth. But for her? That was the closest I would ever get. It didn't feel triumphant. Not in a Hollywood way. But it felt complete. Because for the first time in my life, she had to admit, even if only in 5 words, that I hadn't just earned my place. I'd claimed it. Not by crushing her. Not by destroying her. But by outgrowing her. By succeeding not in spite of her, but outside her shadow entirely. And that? That was the most satisfying revenge of all. Because in the end, the janitor she mocked ended up redesigning the whole damn building.